east, west. The two directions that indicate the boundary between life and death for the Egyptian civilization.
The Nile was the source of the life, and also it was the source of the life for the ancient Egyptians.
A magical place where history has put its foundations, where the gods and their human incarnations, the pharaohs, have been adored and venerated. 3,000 years concentrated in an area of over 5,000 square kilometers. The cult of Amun, the invisible god. Foundation, apogee, and decadence of the biggest and most majestic temples of human civilization. Karnak and Luxor.
Come to the chosen place, Ibit Sut, as the ancient Egyptian called the temples of Karnak.
A long course of water separating the living and the dead. The Nile, flowing from south to north, determined for Egypt the ancient general axis of the earth. The course of the sun, from east to west, crossed the terrestrial line and defined in this way the divine universe. Ra, the sun, was considered the essential manifestation of the creative energy of life. According to the Egyptian tradition, the West Bank, where the sun sets, is the place for the nightly regeneration of Ra. There, the Egyptians built their necropolis. Vice versa, the eastern bank of the river, the area where the sun rises, is the suitable place for welcoming human activity and the great places for cult. Exactly on this bank of the river, in the area bordering Thebes, the Egyptians built the terrestrial fulcrum of the creative energy, the sanctuary of Karnak.
The ancient Egyptians connected the West with the dead, or with the death, because they saw the sunrise rising from the east, and it goes to be its end in the west. So they put their tombs in the west, and everything connecting with their daily life, especially the religion, it should be to the east.
The city of 100 gates. Homer baptized Thebes in this way in part of the Iliad, probably influenced by the majesty of its temples. Al-Karnak, fortified village. The present name of the temple derives from an archaic Arabic phrase. In effect, the complex of Karnak, with its majestic towers and its massive walls, must seem a real and proper fortress to the eyes of the Arabs and the visitors in general. Thebes, at the apex of its splendor, was the center of the economic and religious power of Egypt. With the rise of the 18th dynasty, Thebes became the capital of Egypt, and Karnak the religious epicenter of the country. The Temple of Amun alone possessed over 230,000 hectares. The men at the service of the temple were more than 80,000. A real and proper autosufficient world in which the pharaohs, over the centuries, wanted to leave their own mark, adding halls and monuments.
Karnak temple is not really one temple, it's temples built from the time of the Middle Kingdom. Even we have evidence from the Old Kingdom, but the main construction we have from Xerxes I, from Dynasty 12, the Middle Kingdom, more than 3,800 years ago.
Karnak Temple is one of the largest temples ever built in Egypt. It occupies more than 202 acres. and it has different temples. The main temple which was dedicated to the god Amun-Ra, which is behind us here. This is the main temple which was built for the main god of Thebes.
The Temple of Karnak is dedicated to three divinities: Amun-Ra, king of all the gods, Mut, his wife, and Khonsu, their young son. Together, the three divinities form the Theban triad.
This is the small temple of Ramses III that lies within the great precinct of Amun-Ra at Karnak. Amun-Ra was the greatest of the Egyptian gods from the New Kingdom on. Amun was worshipped here with his consort Mut and their son Khonsu. Mut was a mother goddess. Her name was written with the sign of a vulture, and actually in ancient Egyptian, this is the word for mother. Khonsu was a lunar god who was principally responsible for keeping track of time with the god of wisdom Thoth.
The principal nucleus of Karnak is the Temple of Amun. The structure of the temple divides into two parts. The first follows the east-west axis. Each of these parts is overlooked by towers that delimit the access to courtyards and rooms. The second part of the structure is aligned with the north-south axis. From these directions, the temple continues through a series of four towers, called the Propylaea of the South, in an avenue of sphinxes towards the boundary of the Temple of Mut. The original nucleus of the temple is that bounded by the four towers and the room of the feasts, or Akmenu. The sanctuary is a temple made up of chambers with a telescopic structure that narrows gradually in order to focus the attention on the statue of Amun.
The meaning of the entire complex to be a temples for the god Amun. The ancient Egyptian called these temples Ber Amun in hieroglyphics, means the land or the place of Amun. And they called it also Ibit Sut, meant the chosen place. This is actually the chosen place of the god Amun.
Thou art Amun, Lord of the silence, who cometh to the cry of the humble. I implore thee, because I am sick, and already thou came and saved me. Thou who giveth breath to whom is without, save me, who is in desperation. Thou art Amun-Ra, Lord of Thebes.
The fortune of Amun and the role of divine leader of the Egyptian pantheon coincides with the ascent of the people of Thebes. Originally, Amun was a little-known primordial god. It was the theologians of the Middle Kingdom who attributed to him a new significance. Amun the invisible, the hidden, the transcendent god, king of the gods. In parallel with the expansionist policy of the sovereigns of the 18th dynasty, Amun became the gatherer of immense economic fortunes. The power of the priests that administered the cult grew. From warrior god to cosmic god, through fusion with the sun god Ra. Amun the invisible and Ra, the god who regulated the seasons, became a single god.
Here, the appearance of Amun were done inside his chapel, and also during the night there was the appearance of Khonsu. Khonsu came, his name came from Khinis, and Khinis means the crossing of the sky during the night.
In the sanctuary, one sees a gradual reduction of the luminosity, from the full light of the courtyard to the obscurity of the cell, the extreme point of the world in which heaven and earth are united at dawn and in the darkness of twilight. But it is in the intermediate place that the maximum tension between light and darkness is expressed. The hypostyle hall.
We are in the most important place, the hypostyle hall in the temple of Karnak. I like to come here all the time. When I look at the pillars, the great pillars, I feel like a dwarf. This hypostyle hall, first built by the grandfather of Ramses II, Ramses I, and his father, Seti I. And Ramses II finished this hypostyle hall. It's like 134 huge pillars in about 14 rows.
The great hypostyle atrium was created by the will of Amenhotep III. The central colonnade is flanked by 122 columns of smaller proportions. The difference in height created between the central nave and the two aisles, illuminated by the play of light of the windows in open-work calcareous stone, assumes a strong symbolic characteristic. The light divides into two zones, the huge capitals, leaving the lower part in the shade, so giving the impression of an even greater height. The psychological intent of this complex is to provoke a kind of anxiety with respect to the divinity.
Then you can imagine that this hypostyle hall was roofed with only a slight of open place to give light. It was incredible. You can imagine, if you close your eyes with me, you can imagine the past. If you close this hypostyle hall with a roof and you come to this place, your heart will tremble. Your heart will tremble of magic.
That of the Temple of Karnak is one of the largest and arduous hypostyle halls ever constructed. Its construction involved the reigns of many sovereigns up to the dynasty of Ramses, in particular Seti I and Ramses II. The 134 columns represent sheaves of high papyri. The effect of the repetition in the originals was accentuated by the lively multicoloring that should have contributed in facilitating the osmosis between building and nature. The 12 central columns of the central nave, 22 meters high including the abacus, terminate with a capital as an open papyrus flower, while the 122 aisles, 18 meters high, have a capital with a closed bud. The alignment of the central nave of the main hall of the temple underlines the function of a passage to the sanctuary. Another axis, perpendicular to the first, divides the space in halves, and through the two side doors puts the hall in communication with the Temple of Mut. If the world is chaos, the temple is the center in which the order of things is ensured. In order to do this, the protection of God must be guaranteed. Feeding him, dressing him, praying to him. By taking care of his image, the priests in reality ensure the continuity of the cosmic order.
I'm standing in front of the sacred lake in the complex of Amun-Re at Karnak. According to the Egyptian creation myths, the world before creation was filled with darkness and water. And this lake is actually a symbolic representation within the whole complex, which represents the cosmos as a whole, of the primeval waters from which creation occurred. It was also very important in the life of the temple. Many Egyptologists believed that the priests would come here at dawn to do their ritual ablutions, to bathe before they went to carry out their daily activities in the temple.
The rites within the temple were determined by the position of the sun and included 3 phases: dawn, midday, and sunset. Before dawn, the priests washed themselves in the sacred lake, purifying the body. Later, they opened the tabernacle, and after having uncovered the face of God by offering it to the light, they chanted the morning prayer. The fusion between God and light culminated at midday with the sunlight. The statue of God was carried to a roofless chamber, placed on the top of the temple, and here received the regenerating embrace of the sun. At Karnak, this rite took place probably in one of the rooms of the Akmenu, which is accessed now by means of a stairway that starts from the southeast corner of the room. It is a separate building, which Thutmose III had built. Its heart is a hall with a basilican structure developed in about 40 meters, 5 aisles and the nave raised, resting on stone columns. An innovative structure for that time, duly studied for the Jubilee Feast, the Feast of Sed, the renewal of the royal power of the Pharaoh. That it is an area made for the celebration of the king is proved by the list of the sovereigns set at the entrance, the decorations of the 2 chapels situated at the north, and the sunlight room. To enter in this environment meant being initiated to the cult of Amun and his human incarnation, the king. The same access to the sanctuary through a passage 85 centimeters higher with respect to the difference in level of the floor adds to the mysterious significance of the cult. Having entered the sanctuary, one is confronted with a complex in which the so-called botanical garden stands out. Low reliefs that show plants, fruits, and exotic animals that Thutmose III had found in the 25th year of his reign in the country of Retenu. The 4 fascicled columns are instead the symbolic representation of the cardinal points, the entire world represented in front of its demiurge, Amun-Ra, whose secret chapel can be noticed between the 2 central columns. In the dichotomy between light and darkness, Amun-Ra found his counter-attraction in Khonsu, the moon god.
Khonsu was the son of the god Amun and Mut. And here inside this complex, they built an isolated temple to this god. This temple built to be begun during Ramses III, and it continued to be built until the end of the Ptolemaic period.
The sanctuary dedicated to Khonsu was built by Amenhotep III, probably by enlarging a pre-existing chapel. The temple is made up of a courtyard surrounded on 3 sides by a portico, which has 2 lines of papyrus-shaped columns with capitals as closed buds. There follows the hypostyle atrium, illuminated by cloistered windows. Then 2 vestibules and some side rooms destined to daily rites. From a stairway, the roof can be reached. Here, the priests observed the sky and the stars in order to fix the days for the rites of the liturgic calendar. Khonsu was considered a lunar god, being the extension of the fundamental light, that at night of the moon, the planets, and the stars. Also in the nearby temple of Opet, the birth of the primordial light was celebrated. Opet, the divine mother, the hippopotamus goddess in charge of births, is the recipient of this remarkable building, constructed with some blocks by Thutmose III and Amenhotep II, and finished in the epoch of Ptolemy.
We found in the foundations here that the architects who built this temple recycled many blocks from the Pharaoh times, and they reused these blocks inside the construction of this temple. Also, we found a lot of statues in the foundation of the temple. We found some staircases dates back to maybe to the Middle Kingdom, indicating that this temple, the foundation of it, began during the Middle Kingdom with the core of the Karnak temples, and during the Ptolemaic period, they began to do a renovation for the temple, and they destroyed what was found here before, and they built this new temple, which is unique with its reliefs and its inscriptions.
The temple is composed of a vestibule and about 12 rooms dedicated to mysterious cults. A team of restorers of the Franco-Egyptian studies of the temples of Luxor and Karnak is working on the restoration of the reliefs on the walls of the temple.
We are here in the north room of Opet, of the temple of Opet, where we came to work maybe 2 years ago. We began by this room because maybe it's more symbolic than the other rooms. It's representing actually the resurrection of Osiris. That you see there, this man lying on his bed, which is going to make a child to Isis. And the next room in front will represent the childhood of Horus, the child of Osiris and Isis.
In a year of work, the restorers have cleaned the paintings in the north room of the temple and have renewed the floors of the 5 principal chambers, as well as making secure the walls and the main tower.
The work was in 2 parts, the cleaning work. The first part was made with chemical cleaning, and the second part was made with mechanical cleaning. Chemical cleaning was made with compresses, with carbonate ammonium and methyl cellulose melted. And mechanical part is made with microsandblaster. Now you see the difference. You can see some weaknesses of the first state of the walls, which were really black, like on the ceiling, and on this part of the wall here.
The whole area of the Temple of Karnak really is crowded with many religious buildings. Apart from the enclosure of Montu and Mut, of which today very little remains, in the western area there is the Temple of Ptah that Thutmose III had built. The sanctuary is divided into 3 chapels, decorated with reliefs of the pharaoh. The central one is dedicated to Ptah, king of the earth. The one on the right to the goddess lioness Sekhmet, wife of Ptah. The last chapel served for crowning the sovereign. Always in the same area, there is a temple dedicated to Osiris, Hekjet, governor of eternity.
We are here in one of the most sacred places inside the enclosure temple of Amun-Ra temple. Here we are in the chapel of the god Osiris Hekajet, means the god Osiris, the ruler of the eternity. This chapel was begun to be built during the 25th dynasty, and you can see here one of the most important scenes here. The goddess wife Amun-Ridis offering the 2 bulls, which we call it in Egyptology the new bulls, to the god Amun, and again Parallel to this scene, another scene for the god Amun here with his famous two long feathers. Down of this, you can see the same queen offering the two sistrum to the god Amun. And behind us here, one of the most important architectural symbols in the ancient Egyptian religion is the eternal gates for the god Osiris, the symbol of god Osiris. You can see the 7 gates the ancient Egyptians represented in these chapels.
To enter in the temple of Karnak is equivalent to making a journey backwards in time. On the contrary to what one might think, the western group of buildings, that which from the hypostyle hall leads to the entrance, is more recent. In fact, the space between the third tower, built by Amenhotep III and the first, dates back to the Ptolemaic era and allows us to cross in a few meters centuries of history. The huge hypostyle atrium is the result of the works performed by, amongst others, Seti I and Ramses II. The second tower was designed by Horemheb and completed by Ramses I. In the huge courtyard lying between the first and second tower, the temples of Seti II and Ramses III exist. Again, within the courtyard, there was the large kiosk of Taharqa, of which today only one papyrus-shaped column remains. From a nucleus going back to the Middle Reign, the successive pharaohs have gradually added monuments, pulling down or partially modifying the pre-existing structures. The most evident examples of this practice can be found in the open-air museum at Karnak. The Red Chapel of Hatshepsut, dismantled by his stepson Thutmose III, who used blocks of it to fill the 3 towers, has been partially reconstructed. The chapel is noted for its red color due to the use of blocks of quartzite alternatively cut and shaped. White is the color that distinguishes instead the kiosk of Sesostri I, rebuilt in the first years of the last century, starting from the filler blocks of the third tower. The kiosk is surrounded by 2 ramps and sustained by 16 square cross-sectioned columns.
This is one of the earliest monuments surviving to us at Karnak. It was built by the early Middle Kingdom monarch Senwosret I on the occasion of his first Sed festival, which was a kind of a jubilee at which the gods reaffirmed his right to rule, first celebrated after 30 years on the throne.
The more than 60 scenes contained inside refer to the Jubilee Feast of Sesostri I, the imposition of the crown by God. The kiosk of Sesostri I, in reality, had a precise function. It was one of the deposits of the sacred barge.
It's actually what's known as a bark shrine or a way station. The Theban triad, Amun, Re, Mut, and Khonsu, were, like many ancient Egyptian deities, traveling gods. On certain annual festivals or ritual occasions, they came out of their sanctuaries and they traveled out of the temple into the wide world. To do this, they used barks, great ceremonial barks in which the divine image would have been placed and then hidden from view as it traveled outside the temple.
At Thebes, the processional barge, carried on the shoulders of the priests, had to house the sacred statue of the Theban triad, which was transported from the temple of Karnak to the nearby temple of Luxor in a journey of great symbolic significance. The starting point of the procession was the sanctuary in pink quartzite, which the Macedonian king, Philip Aridaeus, had constructed on the remains of that of Thutmose III. At the center of the chamber, there is a block of granite on which the sacred barge was placed.
The god Amun, who lives in this Ebit Sut, the chosen place, or called the temple of Karnak Ber Amun, the place of Amun. They put him in the sacred boat, and the priests will hold the boat, fronted by the high priest, and the boat will go sailing with the Nile to the south until he can go and visit his wife Mut at the temple of Luxor. That time meant to the ancient Egyptian fertility.
The bark would be carried by priests on their shoulders and then often travel by water as well, either overland or by water. But the oracles could be asked along this route for answers to questions, and there would be the written answers on either side, and the bark would be tipped toward the correct answer, and that's how the oracle was answered. The question to the oracle was answered.
Every year, on the occasion of the Feast of Opet, the statue of the god Amun left the sanctuary of Karnak and was carried in procession to the South Chapel, the Temple of Luxor. The same procession could be performed in two ways. The first on land, the barge leaving the cell and then turning left in direction south, moved towards the Temple of Luxor. The second by river, taking advantage of the flood of the Nile, that in September, in the period of the Feast of Opet, reached its highest level. The barge made its triumphal entrance to the temple.
The whole procession would come south to the Luxor temple along this processional way along which I'm standing. Originally, in the early New Kingdom, this appears to have been a canal so that the gods traveled by boat. Later on, it was paved over and eventually lined with sphinxes, some of which you see here. The sphinxes took different forms. Here, close to Luxor temple, they are human-headed. And these sphinxes here were built by a king of the late period called Nectanebo I.
The entire procession is represented on the walls of the great arcade of Luxor. On the banks of the Nile, priests, soldiers, dancers, musicians accompanied the barge, running on foot through the streets. It is a magnificent feast, one of the very rare occasions in which public and private, divine and human, the elite and the common people find the ideal synthesis. Before arriving at the final station, the barges of the Theban triad were made to stop in purpose-designated deposits.
I'm standing inside one of the 3 bark shrines that lie within the first court in the temple at Luxor. The divine images of the gods, still in their portable shrines, would have been brought here for a rest at the end of the long procession from Karnak here to Luxor temple. This is the westernmost of 3 shrines that are set right next to each other, and this one was for the divine bark of Mut. And you can see an image of Mut here. Offerings are being made by the king to the image of Mut here, and you can recognize her by her name, of course, and also by her image. She wears the vulture headdress that identifies her as a mother goddess, and the double crown of united Egypt. And you can see, here's one scene, and here on the back wall is another of the king making offerings to the goddess Mut.
Avoiding death through the conception of life. The place where life is born at Thebes is the Temple of Luxor, the house of the women of Amun-Ra, who visited here each year in order to be united with his wife Mut. Amun-Ra acquires the appearance of Amun-Min, an itty-phallic man adorned with the same headgear of Amun and with a whip in his hand.
If you look at the temple of Karnak, it's the house of Amun. This could be the house of Amun, but the house of the wife of Amun also, Mut. That trip that they make every year, that Amun will come through the sacred boat with the high priest, and they come through the Nile, and he comes here, it meant, in the mind of the ancient Egyptian, fertility.
Ipet Rezut, that is, Harem of the South. Even the walls of this temple tell the story of who had wanted them, modified them, usurped them, and abandoned them. The first nucleus of the sanctuary dates back to the 12th dynasty, but only with Amenhotep III and Ramses II, the Temple of Luxor has assumed its definitive characteristic aspect.
Most of what you see today is the work of a king of the New Kingdom, Amenhotep III. From the Holy of Holies, the chambers in the back, through a series of shrines and other chambers, into the Sun Court, and on into the processional colonnade. The Great Court at the front and the pylons that front the temple are the work of Ramses II, who changed the axis of that court so that the processional way could lead directly to Karnak.
The place of fertility and the life that is born. Through public rituals such as the Feast of Opet, but also through private moments. In front of the people that take part in the event, but also far from indiscreet eyes, as in one of the more meaningful places of the whole complex, the birth chamber. In this area located at the end of the temple, the divine birth of the king is celebrated, the sacred wedding that unites Amun and the queen and gives to Egypt its heavenly guide, the Pharaoh.
I'm standing in the birth room of Amenhotep III at Luxor Temple. An important concept in Egyptian royal theology was that the king was actually the son of the god Amun-Ra, and the form of Amun worshipped here was the engendering force, was the form of Amun who engendered the new king. The scenes here on the west wall of this room tell this story in a series of vignettes that go across the wall and then up again. We begin the story here in the corner, where Amun-Ra chooses the woman who will bear his next child. Here we have the god Amun, and here we have the queen, Mutemwia. So in fact, he chooses the queen of Egypt very conveniently, who is identified for him by the god Thoth in this next scene. And here Thoth, who you can recognize with his ibis head, leads the god Amun into the royal palace, into the bedchamber of the queen. Amun awakens the queen with his beautiful aroma, and then they share here a divine embrace. Here's the queen and Amun seated on a bed. In the next scene, Amun tells the potter god Khnum, who is responsible for fashioning people, to fashion the new king, which he does here on this potter's wheel. He fashions the king and the king's double, his Ka, which is the life force that passes power from one person to the next. He's assisted here by Hecate, and then the scenes continue in the next register. Thoth announces to the queen that she is pregnant, and then she proceeds to give birth in the company of many gods. The baby is accepted as the new king by Amun and his wife Mut and their child Khansu. And in the top register, there are various scenes of purification where the king is welcomed by all the gods.
The most interior area of the temple, that dedicated by Amenhotep III to the cult of God, has suffered few changes over the course of the centuries. The most significant ones are those made by Alexander the Great, who wanted to insert a naos in the shrine of the barge instead of the 4 columns, and open a passage in order to connect it to the shrine of the statue.
This temple remained important throughout the Pharaonic period and on into the Greco-Roman era. When Alexander the Great took over Egypt, he took over also the cults of the gods and became a true pharaoh. He built the bark shrine that we're standing in right now, and you can see on the walls, he has himself represented in the traditional iconography of a pharaoh, worshiping the same gods that were worshipped here for thousands of years.
Temple of Luxor is a rare witness to historical stratification. After the Greek domination, on the foundations there remain evident traces of the Romans. The chamber, which precedes the shrine, hosts remains of paintings dating back, in all probability, to the era of Diocletian. It is a representation of the four emperors that appear as gods in front of their soldiers.
Eventually, the cult of Amun-Ra came to an end, but the religious life of Luxor Temple was far from over. During the Roman era, this space was transformed into a temple to the imperial cult. The back rooms were blocked off with this apse, and this room was plastered over and covered with frescoes. The entire temple was enclosed as part of a Roman garrison. During the Christian era, a number of churches were built around and inside the temple. One of these can still be seen today within the great court of Ramses II. On top of this church in the 13th century AD, a mosque was built, the Abu el-Hagag.
Witness Thebes for every city. The water and the earth were anew at the beginning. Came the sand to surround the fields, to create their place in the high ground. Then the land existed. Then humanity came into existence to found each city with its true name. Because city is called by its name under the surveillance of Thebes, the Eye of Ra. All the cities are under his shadow to magnify themselves by means of Thebes.
Today, after 3,000 years, Thebes exists no more. East of the Nile, in that which was once considered the city of the living, there remain the temples of Karnak and Luxor. The Egyptians had built them to use them as religious centers. Later peoples have changed the sense and the use of them, only to abandon them to themselves. Only in the last century, a long phase of restoration has been undertaken in order to return these places to their ancient splendor. West of the Nile, the city of the dead is the seat of the necropolis of Thebes, the place for excellence of mystery, the inaccessible place. If the temples in some manner were public, the tombs must be private. Today, the living and the dead have a common destiny. Seas of tourist crowds each year visit temples and necropolis. The desire to know and to measure oneself with history have upset for the nth time the sense of these places. But the mystery and the fascination that they emanate remain intact, a sign that the Egyptian civilization will never die.